When I was in 5th grade, I got to leave school early one day, which, as a kid is pretty cool in its own right. But in this instance, it wasn't only getting to leave early. I was leaving early in order to drive 2 hours with my dad to see Raiders of the Lost Ark in Imax, baby. It was a 1 weekend limited showing in 2012, and my gosh, was my little self excited. Of course, I had seen the film many times over at this point, as my dad is easily one of the biggest Indy fans probably ever. But the idea of seeing it on the big screen in IMAX, that's pretty cool. And I remember feeling like the coolest kid in school, getting to say, yeah, I'm leaving early to watch Indiana Jones in IMAX, what about it? While all the other kids were probably like, what is he talking about? Anyways, even though we were the only ones in the theater for the showing, it was an incredible experience seeing Indy on that huge curved screen, and more importantly, a great memory with my dad, whose love of these and many other films influenced me from a very young age. The sense of adventure, globe-trotting, and flying by the seat of your pants action with archaeology on top of it all really made me fall in love with the first 3 of these films in particular. I had Indiana Jones-themed birthdays, years where I received Indy action figures and Legos, and even though I wasn't thrilled with the latest installment overall, it had some good moments that I was more excited to get to share with my dad than to just see the movie, as it is the first and really probably only new Indy film we'd get to see in theaters together. I'm pretty sure we saw Crystal Skull at home. This franchise and character represented and still represents to me 2 things. One being the childlike sense of grand adventure and discovery that isn't often felt as an adult, and my great relationship with my dad. So, when Indiana Jones and the Great Circle was announced, I was naturally very excited, but like a lot of other people, kind of hesitant. The trailers leading up to this release looked fine overall, but it seemed like it would be a good indie story, but the gameplay and the weird first-person view would probably be pretty off-putting. But boy, was I so glad to be wrong. At this point, the game has been out for a little bit, and you probably know it received really impressive review scores, far better than most of us anticipated. So this isn't going to be a review of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Instead, this video is kind of a personal thank you to those who worked on this game, because Indiana Jones and the Great Circle somehow perfectly captures this feeling the original films had. And even more impressive, it's made me feel like a kid again, playing pretend on the floor of my room with my dad as Indiana Jones, going on adventures doing who knows what. And the fact that that feeling is captured through every aspect of this game, it's an absolutely incredible accomplishment. So there is a lot that this game, I think, does really well as an Indiana Jones fan. I'm just going to kind of go through them in no particular order, in just the order that I kind of wrote them down as I was playing the game. I'm not finished the game. I'm like maybe 9 hours in. I'm, I think, towards the back end of being in Egypt, in Cairo, digging in the dirt as you do. But there's just so much that I want to talk about, starting with the intro of the game being the Raiders of the Lost Ark intro. Like, what an incredible, just immediately jumping in point to showcase what these developers could do. Now, it's gotten some flack from people who aren't as cool, that it wasn't necessary to the story. And I do agree with that for sure, because obviously it's not necessary to the story because it's from Raiders, but it really served as a grand showing by the developers of their knowledge and their ability to recreate the Indy feel before you even get into their game. So what it did for me was obviously, one, drop me right into being Indiana Jones, and it's just such an incredibly well done thing. Like the shot for shot remake of the beginning of Raiders, from the actual cinematic shots and the dialogue, it was so good that I legit FaceTimed my dad during this section just to kind of show him this recreation, particularly when they're when Indy and Satipo are, about to enter the tomb. He's like, this is it. This is where Forrestal cast in, which obviously I can't talk about without talking about Troy Baker voicing Indiana Jones here.
Friend of yours?
A competitor. He was good. He was very, very good.
And I am constantly in awe of his performance, even at this point in the game. As the game continues to progress, I'm continually in awe of his performance, because not only does he just sound almost identical to Raiders' Harrison Ford. He's not doing like an imitation. I think he's doing his own voice acting that sounds so much like Harrison in Raiders of the Lost Ark without it leaning on the side of an impersonation, which I do not understand how they pulled off and how much pressure that would have been for him. And I definitely couldn't imagine what happened at the Game Awards, where Harrison Ford kind of came out and helped give an award and shook Troy Baker's hand and was like, hey, this guy did a great job. Like, childhood dream achieved right there. Like, in the clip, he kind of starts tearing up and stuff, and it's just so wholesome.
I think this guy did a great job. If I'd known he was so good, I would have done it myself.
But if his performance as Indy did not work, the game wouldn't work. Like, it would have been just another Uncharted-like game, but it would not have been an Indiana Jones game because, you're playing as Indiana Jones. Which kind of leads into something I like a lot more than I expected, the first-person perspective. Like I mentioned early in the script, this is something that I and a lot of other people were pretty skeptical on. But as soon as I loaded into the game and got to experience the opening of Raiders from that perspective, I realized why they did it. It's because the developers realized that they could do it well, and so they did. And it really, it's as cliche as it sounds, it really makes you feel like Indiana Jones. Particularly the first moment you get to crack that whip and you get that sound effect and you're like, I just pressed the button to do that. I was just sitting in my chair looking at my PC, giddy as a schoolboy, as Elsa from Last Crusade would say. It is one of the best feelings I've had in gaming in a long time, and that comes down to the sound design of the whip, obviously, but it comes down to that first-person feeling of just cracking it off your hip, and yeah. And it still gets me every time I have to use the whip to either like do a parkour section or in combat and pull someone close to me. It's one of the best parts of the game, hands down. Going back to Troy Baker's performance for a minute, the dialogue in general in this game is some of the best video game dialogue I have experienced in a while. Like, I feel like a lot of games recently, the dialogue is not great. It's really cringy and it's just like trying too hard. This feels like it honestly was just ripped from a unreleased Indiana Jones script, because not only does it feel like some of the original Indiana Jones movies in its dialogue and kind of how people speak and how they deliver lines, it does so in a way that feels natural for every character, not just for Indy, but for Indy in particular. There's some really good moments that are really funny and that are on brand with the kind of Indiana Jones humor, which is kind of like, absurdist humor in a lot of ways, like all the jokes about snakes and just all the little quick, witty Indiana Jones mannerisms that come from him and everyone else in the story, really. For example of this, right after the intro Raider sequence, the first real sequence of the game, is you're in the college with Marcus Brody, Indiana Jones's professor friend. His dialogue between Indy immediately feels like they're old friends, while also, being colleagues and trying to figure things out together, because Marcus is like, hey man, you can't just run off again, like you just got back, like come on, you gotta do your job. And Indy's like, watch me run away. One thing to note actually in particular in this scene here, there's a moment where Indy's kind of packing up and he opens a previously unopened gift that was from Marion, and Marion's theme plays just a little bit here to score the moment really beautifully. And that's something the game does repeatedly, not with her theme necessarily, but just with a lot of the original film themes and the original film score, kind of sprinkles it throughout the game very, very sparingly and very strategically, which is a great choice because it doesn't make it, in your face like, hey, remember this, remember these moments, remember this, score from the movies, remember all these things. But it does it when it feels natural, and to the point, actually, I kind of wish like the main theme was used a little more. I think I've only had one moment in my 9 hours or so where the main theme was on display in full force, and that's when you're kind of escaping the Vatican on the blimp. Great moment, incredible. But besides that, it just kind of is shown in little hints and not like completely in the fullness of the score, which I do think is a really smart decision because it allows the game to breathe on its own with a lot of the original score works feeling right at home in this Indiana Jones story because it weaves into the original film scores, motifs, and everything incredibly well. And I can't play too much of it, unfortunately, in this video. I'm just probably playing little snippets here and there just because copyright is super fun when it's Disney music. One of the other really big things that I didn't realize I wanted from not only this game, but that was missing for me personally from Crystal Skull and kind of Dial of Destiny as well, is the kind of biblical historic event tie-in things to whatever the artifact that Indy is searching for is. Obviously Raiders of the Lost Ark, we have the Ark of the Covenant, the Staff of Ra, and all that kind of stuff. Temple of Doom, nothing really. Last Crusade, Indiana Jones looking for the Holy Grail. And as someone who's a Christian, I just love all of these things that are tied into all the biblical theology and historical real-world events, mostly just because I can be like, oh my gosh, I understood that reference, and I know like generally kind of context of what Indiana Jones is talking about, because he's a character who is, he honestly doesn't believe in a god, even though he's seen all these crazy things, which is kind of an interesting character trait. But then he also is just so incredibly well versed in all of the historical theology of it all, obviously, because he's one, a professor, and two, an archaeologist, and he has to be familiar with all the different cultures and all the different things in the world. So this game does a lot of that. Even at this point in the story, one of my favorite missions so far is in the Vatican when you are going to this underground tomb, and it's a giant's tomb, and you're like, oh, that's cool. One of the puzzles to get into the giant tomb is a puzzle based on a painting of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and you're having to kind of put in order the wounds on his body, from like the cross marks on his hands and the one on his feet, and then like the spear in his side, where there's like a historical fact that a Roman soldier like pierced his side to kind of see if he was dead, and then like water just came out. So you're having to put all these together, and as you're doing that, as you're looking at other murals and kind of figuring out, okay, which goes where, Indy is like quoting verses from the different books of the Bible that it's from, and it made me really realize how much I missed those aspects of the original trilogy in the fourth and fifth movies. I think there was like some of that, I want to say, potentially in the fifth one. I've only seen the fifth one once, so I can't say with certainty, but I absolutely love that. And then when you get into the Tomb of the Giants, it's not just like a giant tomb, it's a tomb of the Nephilim, which is like a race of quote-unquote giants. Like Goliath in the story of David and Goliath would have been a descendant of the Nephilim in those biblical historical times. So I'm in my chair just like freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're like gonna be like doing the whole like the Nephilim, which is like one of the coolest parts that is just like barely mentioned in the historical like text in the Old Testament, especially around the time of Noah and the Ark and the Flood and all that. Really interesting stuff, and love that it's in here. And there's so much more that I could say and talk about here about what I love. There's a ton of little cool callbacks to dialogue and like moments and things from the movies. Like there's a moment where Indy has to feed a snake, and he hates snakes, and he's just like freaking out in the background over it. There's a line where another character says like, oh, we need to go put this in a museum, and then Indy's like looks at her and is like, where they belong. Because there's a great line in the beginning of Last Crusade where he's talking about, like, this belongs in a museum, talking about like the Cross of Coronado artifact that he found in the beginning flashback stuff of Last Crusade. And anyways, there's just small stuff like that that's like you wouldn't notice unless you're a fan, and doesn't have an impact on the story, but as a fan you notice it, and it's incredible. And this game, yeah, just makes me really happy. Every time I see like fun references to films, I'm like texting my dad about it and being like, oh my gosh, there's this moment referencing this like section, and especially all the stuff with like the historical biblical contexts and all of that I was talking to him a lot about. So it's been a great time. If you're an Indy fan, I would love to hear your experience with the game if you've played it, and if you're not and if you're enjoying the game, I definitely would love to hear your experience with the game and anything new, if it makes you want to like watch some of the movies or just kind of your experience with the character as a whole. But if you watched the video all the way to this point, thank you, you're incredible. If you made it this far, comment no camels from the Last Crusade, because that's a great scene. We love to see it. But again, thank you all for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day, and this is possibly my last video of the year. So if it is, I'll see you in the new year, and if not, I do have one more video coming out potentially this year. So stay tuned for that. Have a fantastic day.